Good to have you back, friend.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on, Hugh.
Give us the story behind this. I've interviewed the Justice a few times on the radio show. I knew him back in the 80s when he was the chairman of the EEOC, knew him as a judge on the D.C. Circuit. He's a wonderful guy. My Grandfather's Son, one of the most inspiring books I've ever read. What gave you the motive to make the movie, and how did you get access to the Justice?
Well, I had heard through some mutual friends that Justice Thomas was tired of having his story defined by his enemies. He was tired of the half-truths and untruths that were circulating about him. So, unlike you, I didn't really know much about him. I only had what I remembered from the 1991 confirmation hearing. So I met with him, and as you said, he is a lovely person, and I did some research, and I discovered what you obviously know, that he has a great story. It's just a classic American success story. And Horatio Alger's story is coming from dire poverty in the South, in the segregated South, to the highest court in the land through many twists and turns. It was obviously a great story, and I wanted to tell it. And luckily, he trusted us to tell it. And the film is based on 30 hours of interviews that I conducted with Justice Thomas and his wife over 6 months. And really, the film is primarily Justice Thomas talking right to camera, telling viewers in his own words about his life from the beginning all the way up to today. And as you know from all those times that you've seen him, he is a great speaker and a great storyteller. Lots of people who know him only from his distorted media image might not know that. So,
You know, as someone who's made television movies myself, I think your most difficult part would be when the Justice decides to laugh. He really decides to laugh, Michael.
Yes, he has a great booming laugh. It takes up a lot of time. We have one time in the movie where we diverged a little from that pattern of him talking to camera, and we have him chatting with a few of his clerks at the very end, where you can hear that great booming laugh in full. But most of the film, look, Hugh, you know this well, he's talking about really difficult stuff lots of times. I mean, his hard beginnings, his being raised by his grandfather, but then his leaving the church and his grandfather kicking him out, and his radical period, and his journey back to the right. I mean, and to say nothing of him talking about the confirmation hearing. So these are difficult things. So he wasn't laughing for lots of that. So we'll have only have that problem at the very end of the movie.
Yeah, it's been a dozen years since My Grandfather's Son came out, and I did a long interview with him then, Michael. And what sticks with me about the book is the very early morning, very cold runs in the truck with his grandfather. His grandfather was a hard man. Clarence Thomas loves him, but he was a hard-working, hard, demanding man, and they would make those rounds in an unheated car or truck doing their rounds. And he had a tough, there is no other childhood for a major American figure of which I am equally as difficult as Clarence Thomas's.
That's right. I can't think of any either. And add on to that segregation. I mean, compared to the other justices, let alone, even Abraham Lincoln didn't, who came from hard scrabble beginnings. It wasn't as hard as Justice Thomas's, and he wasn't black from the segregated South. It's just an incredible story. And the grandfather is a central figure. I too thought it was a great memoir, and I recommend everybody read it. But one thing you get from the movie that you don't get from the book is you get to see Justice Thomas and get sort of a personal sense of him. You hear him tell it, you hear and feel his emotion. I think it's great to both read the book and see the movie. And sadly, for lots of people, it's easier to go see a movie than to read a book.
Oh, of course. And that's why Created Equal, Clarence Thomas, in his own words, makes accessible what a few of us have known for a long time. JusticeThomasMovie.com. If you want to see where it's playing near you, if you want to view the trailer, you go to JusticeThomasMovie.com. I'd like to ask you about one thing in particular, Michael Pack, director of Justice of Created Equal. On this past Sunday in the Washington Post, I had a column about fake history. and how Trump would view how Trump's acquittal would be viewed in 50 years. And it came after Amazon put out a fake history ad about Richard Nixon ordering the tapes to be deleted. Richard Nixon did not order the tapes to be deleted, and we don't know what Trump's acquittal will play like in 50 years. But I have this paragraph in Sunday's column, an example. People today believe that at the time of his confirmation, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas was guilty of sexual harassment of Anita Hill. That is not what was believed at the time. A New York Times CBS News poll taken October 28, 1991, found the opposite. 58% of the respondents then believed Thomas's account, 29% believed Hill's. A sustained propaganda war has changed that, Michael Pack.
That is very true. As those figures indicate, it was like 2-1 in his favor after his very moving high-tech lynching speech and his really fighting back against efforts to get him to resign. As he said, he'd rather to withdraw. Rather, he said he'd rather die than withdraw. But that's right. The left continues its attack, and in the case of Justice Thomas, the attack is often tinged with racism. We have cartoons in the film of him as a shoe shine boy polishing Scalia's shoes, as a lawn jockey of the far right. I mean, racist images that, as Justice Thomas says in the movie, you could not apply to a liberal African American without being accused of racism. But it's persisted over all these years, and those myths are there. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we're making the movie. I mean, they are just, who gets to tell the history? I mean, if you let one side, the left, tell a history, you're going to get a very distorted picture. And that's why it's very important that there be historical movies and historical documentaries from the other point of view. So I beg your listeners to go see it. As go to our website. If it's not in your area, it's going to be now. It's in 20 movies this week. It'll be theaters. It'll be in 40 movie theaters next week. But if it's not in your area, there's a place to sign up. And if there's a big enough group of you, we can make another screening happen near you. But it's in New York, L.A., Dallas, Houston, Chicago. It's in a lot of cities. And people on our side, more or less, just don't go to the movies. They like to complain about the left-leaning media, but they don't go, whereas the left actually shows up, which is why I think in some ways they deserve to own the culture. And RBG, the movie about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, is a case in point. I mean, it was a huge success. People went in droves, particularly her fans, but I went too. I learned something. I think people on the left should go see my film. I think they too would learn something about an important political person, plus an inspiring story. But I want your viewers to actually go, rather than just indicate their affection for Thomas, but buy tickets and show up.
JusticeThomasMovie.com to find the theaters near you, JusticeThomasMovie.com. Now, I hope to see him tonight at the State of the Union. He normally does come. I am curious if he liked the end result. Did he watch it?
Well, he has not watched it yet. Ginny has watched it, and she loves it. You can ask him what he thinks. He's heard from lots of people about it. I think he has opinions about it, and we'll see. I think eventually he will watch it. Look, I mean, it was hard for Ginny and Justice Thomas to do it. It was hard for Ginny to watch it. I mean, she teared up during the interview, and she said she cried when she watched it. It's not easy. These are they were really tough stuff. I mean, the grandfather relationship, it was great, but then he had then his grandfather kicks him out, and it's years before they're back together. He has his period of radicalism where he supports Malcolm X and Angela Davis, and and fights with his grandfather during that period about America and his brother who's back from Vietnam. I mean, there's tough stuff in it. And then fundamentally, the Anita Hill period, it's hard for us to imagine it. Remember, only those of us of a certain age remember how amazing it was at the time, how the country was riveted on it, and how hard it was for Justice Thomas.
I've never been as angry as I was on the radio during that period of time. But I look forward to seeing Justice Thomas movie, Created Equal, Clarence Thomas in his own words. It's a film by the wonderful Michael Pack. Go to JusticeThomasMovie.com, find out where it is, and go to see